For more of this kind of content, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. The twin moons of Telvora hovered low in the sky, their silvery light draping the desert city of Ulran in a luminous haze. Samuel stood at the threshold of the grand chamber, his ceremonial robe heavier than he'd expected, its stiff fabric scratching against his skin. Inside, his bride awaited. The thought should have filled him with excitement, but unease clung to him like a second skin. Camila. The woman had swept into his life like a summer storm, all beauty and mystery, wrapped in the traditions of the Karash. Even now, after months of courtship, she remained an enigma. Her laughter was musical, her wit sharp, and her movements so fluid they bordered on hypnotic. But it was her mask, a masterpiece of blue and silver filigree, studded with tiny gemstones, that haunted him most. She never removed it, not in private, not even for him. Samuel stepped inside, the chamber's cool air brushing his skin. The room was dim, lit only by glowing orbs that floated near the ceiling, casting soft, wavering light over the organic, curved architecture. At the center of it all stood Camila, draped in a gown of translucent silver that shimmered like water under moonlight. Her black eyes, framed by the intricate patterns of her mask, followed him as he approached. "You're late," she said, her voice soft and teasing. It carried an otherworldly cadence that made his chest tighten. "You're impossible to be on time for," he replied, forcing a smile. "You always make me feel like I need a moment to prepare." Camila tilted her head, her black hair cascading like liquid silk over her shoulders. The gesture, elegant and deliberate, sent his thoughts spiraling. "And yet here you are," she said. Prepared or not, Samuel stopped a few paces away, his hazel eyes narrowing as he studied her. "You don't make it easy to get to know you, you know." "Is that a complaint?" she asked, her tone playful but guarded. "It's an observation," he said, his voice steady. "You've spent months weaving this web of mystery around yourself. The mask, the secrecy. I'm marrying you, Camila. Shouldn't I know what's beneath it all?" Her smile faltered, just for a moment, before returning with a hint of amusement. "You think a mask can hide the essence of a person?" she asked, stepping closer. Her gown whispered softly against the floor as she moved. "You already know me, Samuel. The parts of me that matter." "Do I?" he pressed, his gaze fixed on her. "Because sometimes I feel like you're keeping me at arm's length, like there's something you're not telling me." She stopped inches away, her hand reaching up to brush against his chest. Her touch was light, cool, and strangely comforting. "And what would you do with the truth if you found it?" she asked, her voice lowering. "Would it change how you feel about me?" Samuel's breath hitched, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't have an answer to that, and she didn't wait for one. "You humans are so curious," she said, her fingers trailing down the edge of his robe. "Always seeking, always questioning. But some truths are not so easily understood." "Try me," he said, his voice firmer than he expected. Her laugh was soft, almost sad. "You are brave, Samuel, and stubborn. Perhaps that is why I chose you." The words struck him. "Chose me? I thought it was fate, or whatever the Karash believe in." "Fate can be shaped," she replied cryptically, her hand falling away from his chest. She turned, walking toward the floating orbs of light that cast shifting shadows across the walls. "You think the mask hides something from you," she continued, her voice softer now, almost wistful. "But it does more than that. It protects both of us." "Protects us from what?" he asked, taking a step toward her. She didn't turn around, her gaze fixed on the glowing orbs. "There are parts of me you may not want to see," she said. "Parts that are not as beautiful as you imagine." "Then show me," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Let me decide for myself." For a long moment, she was silent. The hum of the chamber filled the space between them, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that made his skin prickle. Finally, she turned, her dark eyes unreadable behind the mask. "Do you think love is built on full understanding?" she asked. "Or is it enough to trust what you feel, even if the truth remains elusive?" "I think love is built on both," he said, "and I think I deserve to know the woman I'm pledging my life to." Her lips parted as if to respond, but the sound of the chamber doors creaking open interrupted them. The hum of distant voices drifted in, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Camila straightened, her posture regal as she extended her hand to him. "Then, perhaps in time, you will," she said, her tone unreadable. "For now, let us complete what we've started." Samuel hesitated, his thoughts swirling with doubts and questions. But he took her hand, her cool touch grounding him. As they walked toward the altar, the flickering orbs lighting their path, he couldn't shake the feeling that the mask was only the beginning of the mysteries surrounding her. And as the ceremony began, a single thought echoed in his mind. What if the truth was more than he could handle? The wedding feast was in full swing, the grand hall alive with the sounds of laughter, music, and the low hum of Karash technology embedded seamlessly into the architecture. Guests, both human and Karash, mingled beneath the radiant glow of bioluminescent chandeliers that floated above them like living constellations. Samuel sat at the head of the long, curved table, his fingers idly tracing patterns on the glass surface, his eyes fixed on Camila. She sat beside him, her movements graceful, her voice a soft melody as she exchanged pleasantries with the guests. Her mask, always her mask, gleamed under the shifting lights, its jeweled surface refracting a kaleidoscope of colors. To everyone else, she seemed the perfect bride, poised, mysterious, and beautiful. But Samuel couldn't stop thinking about their earlier conversation in the bridal chamber. Her words, her cryptic warnings, had left a weight in his chest that even the finest Telvoran wine couldn't lift. Samuel. Camilla's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She had leaned closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You're quiet. Are you not enjoying the celebration?" "I'm enjoying it," he lied, forcing a smile. "It's just a lot to take in." Her black eyes searched his, and for a moment, he thought she might press further. Instead, she nodded and turned her attention back to the guests. Samuel exhaled, his mind racing. He wasn't going to let the night end without answers. As the evening wore on, the festivities grew livelier. The Karash guests performed a traditional dance, their movements fluid and otherworldly, their glowing garments casting shifting patterns across the walls. The human guests watched, entranced, but Samuel's focus never wavered from Camila. When the music ended and the applause faded, he leaned closer to her. "Let's go somewhere quiet," he said, his voice low. Her head tilted slightly, her mask catching the light. "Now? In the middle of our celebration?" "It's our celebration," he countered, "and I'd rather spend it with you." She studied him for a long moment before rising gracefully from her seat. "Very well," she said, offering him her hand. "Lead the way." They slipped out of the grand hall, the sound of laughter and music fading behind them as they entered the winding corridors of the Karash Palace. The walls pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins, the organic design of the architecture both beautiful and unsettling. Samuel led her to a small, secluded garden, its center dominated by a pool of glowing water. The air was still, the silence broken only by the soft rustle of alien flora. Camila turned to face him, her mask reflecting the faint light of the pool. "You've been restless all evening," she said, her tone even. "What is it you seek, Samuel?" "The truth," he said, stepping closer. "About you, about us. I can't keep pretending that this mask doesn't mean something more." Her posture stiffened, her hands clasping tightly in front of her. "You don't understand what you're asking." "Then help me understand," he said, his voice firm. "I married you, Camila. I deserve to know the truth." She hesitated, her black eyes glinting in the dim light. "The truth is not easy to bear," she said. "It is not what you expect." "I don't care," he said, his heart pounding. "I want to see you really see you." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, with a trembling hand, Camila reached up to the edge of her mask. "If I show you," she said softly, "there is no going back." "I'm not going anywhere," Samuel said, his voice steady. Her fingers lingered at the edge of the mask before she finally pulled it away. The jeweled piece clattered softly to the ground, and Samuel's breath caught in his throat. Camilla's face was luminous, her blue skin glowing softly in the moonlight. Intricate bioluminescent patterns traced her features, swirling along her high cheekbones and down her neck like living tattoos. Her black eyes, now unmasked, seemed deeper than the night sky. Twin abysses that shimmered faintly with unspoken emotion. She was alien, undeniably so. And yet, she was breathtaking. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Samuel reached out, his hand trembling slightly as his fingers brushed against her cheek. Her skin was cool to the touch, impossibly smooth. "You're..." He struggled for words, his voice thick with awe. "You're beautiful." Camilla's lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. "And now you see," she said softly. "This is who I am." Samuel stared at her, his mind racing. He had known, deep down, that she wasn't human. The signs had been there from the start, but the reality of it, her beauty, Her otherworldliness was more than he had prepared for. "Why hide this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze faltered, her expression clouding with something like sorrow. "Because the world is not as kind as you," she said. "To show my face is to invite fear, hatred. I wore the mask to protect myself, to protect us." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You don't need the mask anymore," he said. "Not with me. Whatever you are, whatever this is, we'll face it together." Tears glimmered in her eyes, and for the first time, her carefully maintained composure seemed to crack. "You don't know what you're promising, Samuel," she said, her voice trembling. "There is so much you don't know." "Then tell me," he said. "Show me. I don't care what it takes. I'm not afraid." Camilla's gaze softened, and a single tear rolled down her cheek, catching the light as it fell. "You should be," she whispered. But as their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and electric, Samuel knew there was no turning back. The mask was gone, but the secrets it had hidden were only beginning to reveal themselves. The newlywed chambers were cloaked in dim light, the bioluminescent designs on the walls casting shifting patterns across the smooth, organic surfaces. Samuel closed the door behind them, the faint echo reverberating in the silence. He stood there for a moment, his gaze fixed on Camila, who stood at the center of the room, her mask still on the floor from earlier. The intimacy of the moment seemed to magnify every detail, the way her luminous blue skin shimmered faintly, the way the glowing patterns along her arms pulsed like a heartbeat, and the way her black eyes searched his face, unsure and vulnerable. For the first time since meeting her, Samuel felt the weight of the unknown pressing against him. She was stunning, breathtaking in a way that defied logic, but the truth of her alien nature was a chasm he hadn't yet crossed. His heart swelled with emotions, desire, uncertainty, awe, but his mind struggled to keep pace. Camila broke the silence first, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "You're quiet again," she said, her hands clasped in front of her. "Does my face trouble you now that you've seen it?" "No," he said quickly, stepping toward her. "No, it's not that." He ran a hand through his dark hair, searching for the right words. "It's just a lot. You're so much more than I imagined." Her lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I told you the truth is not easy." "It's not," he admitted, stopping just a foot away from her, "but it doesn't change how I feel about you. It's just new." She nodded, her expression softening. "And new things can be frightening, even when they are beautiful." "Maybe," he said, his voice quieter now, "but what scares me isn't you. It's that I might not be enough for you." Camilla's eyes widened slightly, and she stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face. Her fingers, cool and smooth, sent a shiver through him. "You are more than enough, Samuel," she said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "You have seen me as I am, without illusions, without barriers. And still, you stand here. That means more to me than you know." Her words wrapped around him like a balm, easing the tension that had coiled in his chest. He placed his hands on her waist, pulling her closer. "I didn't marry you just for the easy parts," he said, his hazel eyes meeting hers. "I married you because I love you, because I need you. No mask or secret can change that." Camila exhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing as she leaned into him. "You are a remarkable man, Samuel," she murmured, "and I am grateful for you. But there is still so much you don't know, so much I must tell you." "Then we'll figure it out," he said, his tone firm. "Together." For a moment, they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside their chamber forgotten. But the intensity of the moment began to shift, an undeniable pull sparking between them. Samuel tilted her chin up, his thumb brushing against her cheek as he gazed into her eyes. "I can't stop looking at you," he whispered. Camilla's lips curved into a smile, her black eyes shimmering. "And I can't stop wanting you." Their kiss was slow at first, a tentative meeting of lips that quickly deepened. Her cool skin contrasted with the heat radiating from him, the difference sending sparks through every nerve in his body. As her arms wrapped around his neck, he pulled her closer, his hands sliding along the curve of her back. The room seemed to pulse with their shared energy, the glowing patterns on Camilla's skin intensifying as their passion flared. The confusion, the uncertainty, everything melted away, leaving only the undeniable connection between them. Samuel felt as though he was being consumed by her, drawn into the depths of her being, and he welcomed it. When they finally broke apart, their breaths ragged and their foreheads pressed together. Camilla's voice was barely above a whisper. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that when you saw me, you would turn away." "Never," he said firmly, his hands cradling her face. "I didn't marry the mask, Camila. I married you." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she smiled, her expression radiant. "And I married the only man brave enough to love me as I am." That night, as they lay entwined beneath the shifting lights of the chamber, their love burned brighter than ever, uniting two souls from worlds apart. But even in the warmth of their embrace, the unspoken truths of her past and the dangers they might face lingered like shadows on the edge of the light. Samuel knew their journey was only beginning, and he was ready for whatever came next. Together, they would face it all. The first tremor came just before dawn. Samuel woke with a start, his hand instinctively reaching for Camila. She was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, her glowing patterns dim in the early light. Her black eyes stared at the chamber door, her expression a mix of calm determination and unease. "Camila," Samuel said, his voice groggy but alert. "What's wrong?" "They've felt it," she said softly, her tone carrying an edge of grim certainty. "Felt what?" he asked, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His muscles were tense, his instincts screaming that something was off. "The unmasking," she replied, rising to her feet. The glow of her skin intensified as she moved, her presence commanding and powerful. "When I revealed myself to you, it sent out a ripple. My kind, those who oppose our union, can sense when one of us abandons the mask." Samuel frowned, his mind racing. "You're telling me they know that they're coming?" She turned to him, her expression both fierce and tender. "Yes, they will come, Samuel. They will see it as a betrayal of our traditions. But it's more than that." She placed a hand on his chest, her touch grounding him. "By unmasking, I've made myself vulnerable. And now, so are you." A low, vibrating hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. Samuel's gaze shot to the windows, where the twin moons of Telvora were giving way to the pale orange of dawn. On the horizon, dark shapes began to materialize, cutting through the desert haze. "They're here," Camila said, her voice steady. Samuel grabbed his ceremonial sword, a weapon more symbolic than practical, and turned to her. "What do they want?" "Me," she said simply, "and to make an example of us." Before he could respond, the chamber doors burst open, the force sending shards of bioluminescent material scattering across the floor. A group of Karash warriors strode in, their figures silhouetted against the glowing hall behind them. Their masks, angular and menacing, reflected the light as their leader stepped forward. "Camila," the leader said, his voice cold and resonant, "you have broken the sacred covenant." Samuel moved to stand in front of her, his hazel eyes blazing with defiance. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The warriors exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable behind their masks. The leader tilted his head, his focus shifting to Camila. "You have brought a human into our sacred bonds and discarded your mask. You know the penalty." "She's done nothing wrong," Samuel growled, gripping his sword tightly. "Your traditions don't own her." The leader ignored him, his gaze locked on Camila. "Is this human worth your life, your people's wrath, their exile?" Camila stepped forward, her glowing patterns flaring brighter with every step. "He is worth everything," she said, her voice calm, but filled with unyielding strength. "And I will not hide anymore." Before the warriors could respond, Camilla's skin erupted in light, the intricate bioluminescent patterns on her body pulsing with a dazzling intensity. The room filled with a low hum, a vibration that seemed to emanate from her very being. The warriors staggered, their movements unsteady, as the force of her unmasked presence washed over them. "Camila, what are you doing?" Samuel asked, his voice tight with concern. "Ending this," she said, her black eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. She extended her hand, and the air around her seemed to ripple, the glowing veins on the walls reacting to her power. The warriors clutched their masks as if in pain, the resonance of her energy overwhelming their defenses. The leader dropped to his knees, his voice strained. "You would use your true form against your own kind?" "I would use it to protect what I love," Camila replied, her tone unyielding. "Leave now, and tell the others that I am done hiding." The warriors hesitated, their forms trembling under the weight of her power. One by one, they began to retreat, their masks cracked, their pride shattered. The leader lingered, his mask fractured, but his gaze defiant. "This is not over, Camila. You will face the consequences." "Let them come," she said, her voice a beacon of defiance. I am not afraid. As the warriors fled, the chamber grew still, the tension dissipating like a receding storm. Samuel turned to Camila, his chest heaving with adrenaline. That was incredible. She gave him a faint smile, her glowing patterns dimming as she approached him. It was necessary, she said softly, but it is only the beginning. They will come for us again, stronger and more determined. Let them, Samuel said, pulling her into his arms. We'll face them together. Camila rested her head against his chest, her cool skin a stark contrast to the heat radiating from him. You are braver than I ever imagined, Samuel, she murmured, but I fear this battle will cost us more than we know. Samuel tightened his hold on her, his resolve unwavering. No matter what it costs, I'll protect you. We'll protect each other. As the first rays of the Telvoran sun broke through the windows, their light casting long shadows across the chamber, Samuel and Camila stood together, united against the storm that loomed on the horizon. The dawn sun rose higher over the desert, its light cutting through the translucent walls of the Karash palace. Camila and Samuel stood in the center of the chamber, their shared resolve palpable, but the echoes of the confrontation lingered in the stillness. Samuel paced the room, his ceremonial sword still gripped tightly in his hand. They'll be back, he said, his tone grim, and they won't stop until they've punished us, or worse. Camila stood motionless, her glowing skin dimming to a faint shimmer as her emotions settled. They won't come alone next time, she said, her voice steady but shadowed by worry. The Karash Council will see my actions as rebellion, a threat to our way of life. They will rally others to their cause. Samuel stopped pacing and turned to her. So, we fight. You don't understand, she said, her gaze meeting his. The Karash are not like humans. We do not settle disputes with words alone, and we do not forgive easily. They will come with their strongest warriors, their most advanced technology. They will make an example of us to ensure no one else dares to challenge them. Then we prepare, Samuel said firmly. We won't go down without a fight. Camila moved to him, her cool fingers brushing against his hand, still clenched around the hilt of his sword. You're brave, Samuel, but this isn't just about fighting. It's about surviving. If we want to stand a chance, we need allies. Samuel frowned. Allies? From where? Your own people just tried to kill us. Not all Karash follow the council blindly, she said. There are those who believe in change, who want to see a world where we no longer hide behind masks. But they live on the fringes, in exile. We'll have to find them before the council finds us. Samuel nodded, his mind racing. Then we leave. We get out of here before they return. Camila hesitated, her gaze lingering on the room around them. This place has been my home for so long, she said softly. But you're right. It's no longer safe. A sudden, sharp noise shattered the quiet, a distant rumble that seemed to come from deep within the palace. Both of them froze, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. They're already here, Camila said, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel moved quickly, grabbing a small pack of essentials from the corner of the room. He slung it over his shoulder and turned to her. How do we get out? Camila moved to the wall, her fingers brushing against a faintly glowing panel. The surface rippled like water, revealing a hidden passage. This leads to the outer corridors, she said. From there, we can make our way to the desert, but we'll have to move fast. Samuel nodded, his grip tightening on his sword. Let's go. As they stepped into the passage, the hum of approaching footsteps echoed behind them, growing louder with every second. The walls of the palace seemed to vibrate with the energy of the Karash warriors, their presence a suffocating reminder of the danger they faced. Camila led the way, her bioluminescent patterns glowing faintly to light the narrow tunnel. Samuel followed closely, his senses on high alert. The air was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the arid heat outside, and the hum of the palace grew fainter as they moved deeper into the passage. Where does this lead? Samuel asked, his voice low. To the western edge of the city, Camila replied. From there we'll head into the desert. There's a network of caves where the exiles are known to gather. If we can reach them, they might help us. Might? Samuel repeated, his tone skeptical. They've lived in isolation for decades, she said. Trust doesn't come easily, but if they see you see us, they may see hope. Before Samuel could respond, the passage shuddered violently, a deep, resonant boom shaking the walls. Dust rained down from the ceiling as Camila stumbled, catching herself against the wall. They're collapsing the palace, she said, her voice sharp with urgency. We have to move. They broke into a run, the passage narrowing and twisting as the sounds of destruction grew louder. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest, each step driving him closer to exhaustion. But Camila pressed on, her movements swift and determined. Finally, the passage opened onto a ledge overlooking the vast desert. The sun blazed above, its light glinting off the crystalline sands. Camila turned to Samuel, her expression resolute. "We have to keep moving. The city won't hold them back for long." As they descended the rocky path into the desert, the weight of their situation pressed down on Samuel. He glanced at Camila, her glowing patterns dim in the harsh sunlight, and felt a surge of determination. No matter what came next, no matter how powerful their enemies, he would stand by her side. Together, they would find allies, build their strength, and face whatever the Karash Council sent their way. The battle for survival had only just begun. The desert battlefield stretched endlessly under the light of the twin moons, their silvery glow casting an eerie brilliance on the sands. The Karash forces, clad in their ceremonial armor and menacing masks, stood in tight formation, their weapons humming with deadly energy. On the other side, Camila and Samuel stood at the head of a ragtag army of exiles, human rebels, and Karash defectors, united under the banner of change. Camilla's glowing patterns pulsed brightly, a beacon of defiance against the oppressive traditions of her people. Samuel stood at her side, his sword drawn and gleaming, his hazel eyes sharp and unwavering. The tension in the air was electric, the silence before the clash deafening. "Are you ready for this?" Samuel asked, his voice low but steady. Camila glanced at him, her black eyes shimmering with determination. "I was born for this moment," she said, "but this war isn't just mine, it's ours." A low hum echoed across the battlefield as the Karash Council's warriors began their advance. Their energy weapons crackled to life, their footsteps synchronized like a drumbeat of inevitability. "Hold the line," Samuel shouted, his voice cutting through the night. The exiles responded with a unified roar, their makeshift weapons raised high. Humans and Karash alike stood shoulder to shoulder, their resolve outweighing their fear. The ground trembled as the two forces collided, a cacophony of clashing metal, energy blasts, and war cries filling the air. Samuel charged forward, his sword cutting through the chaos. His movements were precise and relentless, each strike a testament to his resolve. Beside him, Camila unleashed her true power. Her skin glowed like a star, the bioluminescent patterns on her body radiating waves of energy that sent enemy warriors sprawling. The Karash Council's leader, a towering figure clad in an ornate mask, stepped into the fray. His voice boomed across the battlefield, amplified by his armor. "Camila, you have betrayed your people, your heritage. This ends now." Camila turned to face him, her glowing form a stark contrast to his imposing figure. "It ends, but not as you imagine," she said, her voice calm and resonant. "This is not betrayal, it's liberation." The leader raised his weapon, an intricate staff crackling with raw energy. He swung it toward Camila, the force of the attack ripping through the air. Camila dodged, her movements fluid and precise, and retaliated with a burst of light that illuminated the battlefield. Samuel fought his way toward her, cutting down enemies with ruthless efficiency. "Camila," he called out, his voice strained. "We need to take him down together." She nodded, her bioluminescent patterns flaring brighter. "Let's finish this." The leader charged again, his staff unleashing a devastating blast of energy. Camila raised her hands, a glowing shield of light materializing before her. The impact shook the ground, but she held firm, her strength unyielding. Samuel used the opening to flank the leader, his sword slicing through the armor's defenses. The leader staggered, his mask cracking from the force of the blows. "You think you can destroy centuries of tradition with brute force?" he snarled, his voice laced with fury. "It's not brute force," Samuel said, his voice steady. "It's love, unity, and the courage to break free." Camila unleashed a final surge of energy, her glowing patterns intensifying until the light was blinding. The leader cried out as the force shattered his mask, revealing his face aged, scarred, and filled with a mix of rage and despair. He fell to his knees, his weapon clattering to the ground. The battlefield grew silent as the remaining Karash warriors paused, their gaze shifting to Camila. Her luminous figure stood tall, her presence commanding and unyielding. "It's over," she said, her voice carrying across the desert. "No more masks, no more lies. The time for change is now." The Karash warriors slowly lowered their weapons, the weight of centuries of tradition crumbling in the face of her words. The exiles and rebels cheered, their victory a beacon of hope in the desolate night. Samuel stepped to Camila's side, his hand finding hers. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "We did it," she corrected, her black eyes meeting his. Together. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the battlefield transformed into a gathering of unity. Humans and Karash alike embraced, their differences no longer barriers, but bridges to a shared future. The masks, once symbols of secrecy and oppression, lay scattered across the sands, abandoned and forgotten. Camila turned to Samuel, her glowing patterns softening in the morning light. "This is just the beginning," she said. "There's so much more to build, to heal." He smiled, his hazel eyes warm and steady. "And we'll do it, together." As they stood hand in hand, the desert wind carrying away the echoes of war, one truth became clear. Love, trust, and the courage to unmask the truth had not only won the battle, but forged a new world, one where the light of freedom would shine forever.